Hi. All right, we are starting chapter 31 in our history book. So if you want to get your book and follow along while we read chapter 31, then go do that. You can pause it, go get your book, and come back and read it with me, okay? Okay. It's called A Different Kind of Rebellion. The World of Factories. Do you remember walking down the road between the poplar trees into the little English village where Weaver sat behind his loom and his wife spun thread? A 19th century writer named Andrew described the weaver's life as a healthy, happy way to earn money. The dwelling and small gardens were clean and neat, the family well clad, he wrote. The workshop of the weaver was a rural cottage, from which, when he was tired of sedentary labor, he could sally forth into his little garden. Across Europe, millions of people worked at home along with their whole families. If the mother and father wove cloth, the children worked too. A 10-year-old sorted cotton, a teenage daughter spun thread, an older son tended the sheep and sheared their wool. Even a toddler might help by winding thread carefully into a roll. When the family finished making their cloth, they would travel to market and sell it, using the money to buy food and tools. In the summer, they might spend more time tending their garden plot of carrots, cabbages, and beans. In the winter, when frost covered the ground, the family would go back to making cloth all day long. Now, let's go forward in time 30 years. Andrew describes the very same village where the small gardens and cottages stood. There are hundreds of factories. At the side of each factory, there is a great chimney which belches forth black smoke and indicates the presence of the powerful steam engines. The houses have become black on account of the smoke. The river is so tainted that the water resembles the contents of a black dye vat. What has happened to England? Oh, steam engines weren't so good, huh? Factories are springing up all over the countryside. Now machines could spin, weave, and knit better than the men and women who once made thread and cloth. Thanks to steam power, these machines never need to stop. Cloth is spun, woven, and cut faster and faster and faster. Rich men who might once have rented out their land to farmers now have a better way to make money. They can buy a factory and hire workers to run the machines. The factory will make so much cloth that the owner can sell the cloth, pay the workers the same amount they would have earned making cloth at home, and still have plenty of money left over. All over England, wealthy landowners began to buy and build factories. Soon, they discovered that they could sell the cloth made in factories much more cheaply than the cloth made by village workers in their homes. More and more people bought the cheap cloth, not the handmade cloth. Now, weavers who worked at home couldn't get anyone to buy their cloth unless they sold it for less. Since they made less money from each piece, they had to work longer. Weavers worked for 16 hours a day, their fingers sore and their eyes red, and still couldn't make enough money to buy food. They had only one choice: leave their homes and go to work in the factories. Today, most people go to work. But back at the beginning of the 19th century, going to work was a brand new idea. Families had always worked together in their homes. Now they were leaving their homes to go somewhere else in order to make a living. The work at factories was different than the work at home. Weavers were used to making cloth from beginning to end, getting the wool, combing it, spinning it, weaving it, cutting it, and selling it. But in the factory, each worker only did one task, like tying threads on a spinning machine, over and over again, all day long. An old-fashioned weaver didn't need anyone to make him work. If he had many pieces of cloth, he earned a lot of money when he sold his goods. If he was lazy or took a nap, instead, he didn't make any money at all, and he went hungry. That was enough to make him work hard. But in factories, workers couldn't get paid for each piece of cloth finished. Each worker was only doing one small part of the work. so they had to be paid by the hour instead. Now, someone had to watch over them to make sure that they spent all of their time working hard. These watchers were called overseers. Overseers treated factory workers with cruelty to make sure they were earning their money. Workers had to pay fines for looking out of windows, speaking to each other, or taking more than 15 minutes to eat a meal. Sometimes they weren't allowed to go to the bathroom all day long. All too soon, factory owners realized that women and children could run machines just as well as men, and that they were cheaper to hire. Men could no longer make a living working at home. Now they often couldn't get factory jobs either. But children worked long hours so that their families would have enough money to live. They had to stand all day in front of machines, so long that many children had bow legs, deformed from standing. They had to pay fines if they talked or made faces at each other. In cotton factories, the cotton gave off fine white dust that the children breathed in all day, and their lungs quit working properly, and many of them died. The English poet William Blake protested that the factories, or mills, were turning England from a Jerusalem, a Christian kingdom, into a country that God would judge. He wrote, "And did the countenance divine shine down upon these clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded here, among those dark satanic mills?" The poet William Wordsworth complained that lives of people were being sacrificed to make money. Men, maidens, youths, mothers and little children, boys and girls, enter, and each the wonted task resumes within this temple, where is offered up to gain the master idol of the realm, perpetual sacrifice. The British government did try to pass some laws to make the factories better places, but the rich men who made money from the factories objected. They protested so loudly that only very weak laws could be passed. One law, or Factory Act, said that children could only work 12 hours per day. Another Factory Act said that a child had to be 8 before going to work in a factory. Now it was perfectly legal for an 8-year-old to work from sunrise to sunset in a factory. All over England and soon across Europe, children, women, and men worked long, cold, miserable hours, earning just enough money to buy food. Ugh. The Luddites. Not everyone objected to the spread of factories. Over in the United States, the politician Alexander Hamilton argued that factories were good for the country. In the old days, people who had never been trained to weave, farm, or work in some other craft became beggars or thieves. Now they could find work in the factories. Hamilton also thought that factory owners were doing a good thing when they hired children. In general, he wrote, women and children are rendered more useful, and the latter more early useful, by factories than they would be otherwise. But weavers, spinners, and others who were trained in a craft had been pushed out of their jobs, and now a skilled weaver who had once taken pride in making beautiful cloth had to go to a factory, working long hours in a badly lit and noisy room, and perform one boring task over and over again. In England, weavers and spinners began to attack factories and smash the machines that were changing their lives. They were joined by other workers, carpenters, blacksmiths, and tailors, who realized that factories might soon force them out of livelihoods as well. An underground army formed. Their leader was a mysterious man who called himself General Ned Ludd. No one knows who he was or why he chose his name. But all over England, workmen joined in General Ludd's army. They became known as Luddites. Luddites had their own regiments, weapons, and secret handshakes. They had a secret password, free liberty. They sang war songs as they marched up to factories, waving axes and hammers. "How gloomy and dark is the day when men have to fight for their bread," one song went. Another song warned, "You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought to account for what you've solely done." Luddites broke hundreds of machines and shut down dozens of factories. To the poorest factory workers, Luddites were heroes. A popular song of the day began, "Chant no more your old rhymes about bold Robin Hood. His feats I but little admire. I will sing the achievements of General Ludd, now the hero of Nottinghamshire." Today, people who are suspicious of new machines like computers are sometimes called Luddites. But the Luddites weren't just smashing the machines because they didn't like scientific discoveries and new advances. The Luddites were angry that their whole way of life was changing. They couldn't make a living at home anymore. They had to work in the factories or starve. And factory owners had the power to choose how much money the workers would make and how many hours they had to work. The workers themselves had no power at all. They couldn't demand to be paid a decent amount of money. They couldn't ask for shorter days or weekends off. They couldn't even ask for proper light and reasonable lunch breaks. They worked 6 days every week and sometimes a half day on Sunday too. England was so full of hungry people that factory owners could just fire anyone who complained and hire someone else. Gosh. The protest and machine breakings went on for years, but finally the British government joined with the factory owners to stop the protest. New laws made breaking a factory machine a capital crime. That means anyone who smashed a machine could be put to death. Soldiers were marched in to protect the factories. Workers were told they were lucky to have any work at all. Many of them didn't feel lucky. "What with the heat and the hard work," one factory worker complained, "it feels as if the devil was after us. We are told to be content in the station of life to which the Lord has placed us. But I say the Lord never did place us there, so we have no right to be content." Over in the United States, leaders such as Thomas Jefferson agreed. "While we have land to labor," Thomas Jefferson wrote back to Alexander Hamilton, "let us never wish to see our citizens occupied at a workbench. Let our workshops remain in Europe." Jefferson thought that the United States would be a much better place to live if all of the cotton, wool, and wood were shipped over to Europe to the factories there, and the finished goods were then shipped back. Factories, Jefferson complained, would add just so much to the support of pure government, as swords do to the strength of the human body. But business in the United States couldn't resist the money that factories brought, and soon the factory system spread to the United States as well. Factories were built at the edges of the cities of Boston and New York. Factory workers lived near the factories in tiny, shabby houses built just for them. Because they made so little money, 2 or 3 families might live together in a single house. So many people crowded to these worker settlements or slums that cities couldn't keep up with building roads or laying down pipes for fresh water. Slums often had open sewers where human waste mixed with the drinking water. And the trash in the water decayed and gave off gases, and the water became so foul and filled with gases that in hot weather it would actually catch on fire. Diseases like typhoid and cholera spread through the water and killed thousands of factory workers. In the city of Boston, an Irishman who had come from Britain to find factory work could expect to live only 14 years before dying of overwork and disease. Thomas Jefferson was right. The factory slums had become sores on the body of the United States. The end.